Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there is a ton of news stories to get into today. So let's talk about Impact Wrestling. Let's talk about the big main event that has been announced for Impact Wrestling's upcoming pay-per-view. Now, it feels crazy, doesn't it? It feels crazy that like 12 months ago, or just under 12 months ago, because it's going to be taking place on January the 8th. But it feels crazy that 12 months ago, we were talking about, Kenny Omega just winning the AEW World Championship, and his debut appearance as AEW World Champion was going to be taking place on Impact Wrestling on Tuesday nights, not Thursday nights. And of course, his first match inside of an Impact Wrestling ring would take place at the aforementioned pay-per-view in January. And he would be teaming up with the Good Brothers to face off against then the Impact World Champion Rich Swann, and meant to be the Motor City Machine Guns. And Moose came in and he replaced Alex Shelley, who hasn't returned since. All that, it's I know it's been a year, but it's flown by so quickly, hasn't it? It really, really has. So it feels kind of strange to be talking about the hard to kill main event coming up next for the Impact World Championship, and it has been announced. Now, it was announced following last Thursday's episode of Impact Wrestling. We'll talk about the ratings as well when it comes to that in a second. But following last Thursday's episode of Impact Wrestling, it was announced by Executive Vice President Scott D'Amore that Moose will defend his Impact World Championship in a three-way match against W. Morrissey and Matt Cardona at the Hard to Kill event on Saturday, January 8th. Now, Cardona and Eddie Edwards defeated Moose and Morrissey in the main event of Impact on Access TV. After the match, Morrissey savagely assaulted Moose, ending, of course, their dominant alliance that we have seen throughout the latter stages of 2021. Now, neither Cardona or Morrissey has captured the World Championship in Impact Wrestling. Cardona joined Impact nearly 12 months ago at the Hard to Kill as a surprise opponent against Ace Austin, whereas W. Morrissey's arrival came at the Rebellion pay-per-view in April, where he temporarily aligned himself with Violent by Design. Now, Moose, of course, is in his first reign with the Impact World Championship. He captured the championship from Josh Alexander at Bound for Glory this past October. His last title defense came at Turning Point last month against Eddie Edwards in a Full Metal Mayhem contest. I always struggle to say that. I always struggle to say Full Metal Mayhem. But yeah, so the match has been announced. I will be honest with you, the Cardona bit surprises me, to be honest with you. Moose versus W. Morrissey, I understand. Like I said, they've been building to that, and I think actually, I want to say I predicted that W. Morrissey was going to be in the Hard to Kill main event like a couple of months ago. I wasn't sure if it would necessarily be against Moose, but I felt that he would be in the main event, and it would be, against, I thought, Josh Alexander at the time, but that's not going to happen. I wouldn't be surprised if this turned into maybe, I was going to say a four-way match, but I don't think so, because I think it'll be Josh Alexander versus Jonah. And then I think eventually Josh Alexander is going to be the Impact World Champion. That he will. Like, that's the story here, is that everyone assumed it was going to take place at Bound for Glory. It didn't. It will happen later on. My only thing I will say, though, about Josh Alexander is we don't know, I don't think, when it comes to his contract status. I know his contract of Impact, I think, is up in like February of 2022. Maybe it's just a preventative measure by Impact Wrestling. Maybe Impact Wrestling thinks, you know what, we want to put the title on Josh Alexander. We want him to be the long-term babyface champion, but he might not be here in February, and we need to put it on a guy like Moose, who we know is going to be here for a long time because he signed a contract extension earlier this year in the summer. So maybe that's the case. Maybe that's the case for the whole situation when it comes to Josh Alexander. But again, the Moose versus W. Morrissey makes sense. They were a tag team. They're two singles guys, dominant guys in a tag team. What happens? The team splits up when one's the world champion. The other guy goes after the title. It's pro wrestling logic and booking. So that makes sense. Matt Cardona, if this was the Matt Cardona that's in GCW, I would be really excited. But we don't see the Matt Cardona that's in GCW in Impact Wrestling. We see the Matt Cardona that we associate really with WWE. We see, Zack Ryder almost. It's not exactly the same, but we see that sort of babyface version of Matt Cardona that I think at this point is pretty outdated, and I don't really know if fans have that much interest in seeing. The Matt Cardona that's in GCW, the guy that's a square peg in a round hole and is really out of place, basically a WWE superstar in ECW, that kind of feeling, that works. And I want to see that version of Matt Cardona in Impact Wrestling. I've been saying that for a long time, but we haven't really seen that. So I think, to be honest, he's probably in there to take the pinfall. That kind of what it feels like, isn't it? That If it was Moose versus Morrissey, maybe it's too much of a heel match because it's a heel versus heel match for a big pay-per-view. Although I think two giant guys facing each other kind of sells itself. But maybe they're having Matt Cardona in there just for the babyface aspect and most importantly to take the pinfall. So I think that might be the case there. As far as the other matches that have been announced for Hard to Kill so far, of course, we've got the Knockouts Championship rematch between Mickie James and Deonna Purrazzo. We'll touch on Mickie James in a second. And also the first ever Knockouts Ultimate X match. Of course, the winner of that match will receive a future title shot at the Knockouts Championship. Really excited for that one. Really excited for that one. And again, it reinforces the point I've made time and time again about Impact Wrestling. When you see stars that leave WWE, female stars that leave WWE, and it's a case of they're going to go to AEW, and I always say no. Impact Wrestling for the female side of things is most of the time the way to go, because you'll get opportunity, you'll get put in main events, you'll get put in historic matches, first time ever matches. Of course, in AEW, you'll probably be on a bigger platform. You're going to be on TNT or TBS every single week. But in terms of if you want to do work in the ring and not have a short match, one match per week or two matches per week, whatever it may be, Impact Wrestling is probably the place to be. So they continue to do sort of cutting edge and quite revolutionary stuff when it comes to women's wrestling, and it's fascinating to see. But we'll get into all of that as we get closer and closer to the event in January. I said we were going to talk about the ratings, and I know every single time I talk about the ratings here on the channel, and it might feel like every time I talk about the ratings, I'm talking negatively about the ratings, but these are the ratings at the moment. I can only report what what the ratings are, and again, it's not great. It's not great because Thursday's taped episode of Impact Wrestling drew just 96,000 viewers on Access TV, according to Nielsen via WrestleNomics. Now, this number is up. It's up 100% actually from the prior week's 48,000 viewers. That was, I think, again, a near record low, or if not a record low for Impact Wrestling. That was the Thanksgiving Wrestle House 2 edition of Impact Wrestling, which was bizarre. And don't get me wrong, I praised the first Wrestle House because I felt that it was really creative, especially in the pandemic where you could do stuff like that, the cinematic stuff like that. But this one, for me, was just a step too far. Nevertheless, this number that we saw last Thursday, the 96,000 viewers, it's still down over 25% from the 129,000 viewers that the show drew the week before Thanksgiving. Thursday's episode of Impact drew a 0.02 rating in the 18 to 49 key demographic, which of course is up from that Thanksgiving show, but it's still not great. It's still not great. And of course, Impact Wrestling did not rank in the cable top 150 for the 9th consecutive week. As always, and since the move to Thursday, specifically around this time of the year, Thursday's Impact had major competition from the NFL on cable and network television. Impact went head-to-head with the NFL game between the Bills and the Saints on NBC, which drew nearly 20 million viewers. Crazy numbers, isn't it? Crazy numbers. So it's always going to struggle. It's always going to struggle with that. And I think that's evidenced when it comes to the year-on-year numbers. And that's why I still talk about it. That's why I still talk about the ratings. And again, I know that it's not maybe a popular topic to talk about because it does seem to be quite negative. But Impact viewership for this week was down 42.2% from the same week in 2020. Yes, 42. We're talking about nearly 50%. It's nearly halved in a year. The key demo rating was down 60% from the year prior. And I think that's why I keep talking about this. You know, I understand, and I'm sure we will get the comments below, and I welcome them, I really do, about people saying, you know, not a lot of people watch it on Access TV because not a lot of people have access to it. Ironic puns. We've used that a million times. People watch it on YouTube, or they watch it on, the YouTube Ultimate Insiders, all that kind of stuff, right? As part of the membership thing, or they watch it on social media, or they watch it on replay, or they have other ways and other means of watching it. That is totally fair. And I don't mean when I talk about these ratings to knock Impact. I don't. You know, I cover Impact Wrestling a lot here on the channel, and I will continue to do that. Always. I will continue to do that. But it doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. And they've kind of... I think, again, the real key aspects as to why this has happened, this massive drop-off, I think there's a couple of reasons. I think the biggest reasons, obviously, are the return of fans. I think the return of fans and the spoilers being widely available. You know, Impact Wrestling tapes month at a time, and by the time the end of the month comes around, those results have been out there for 3 or 4 weeks, and you just don't really have much interest in watching. So I think that's a major part of it. Obviously, and maybe even bigger than fans returning, it's the move to Thursdays. Obviously, traditionally, Impact Wrestling was on Thursdays when they were on Spike TV. But they actually were doing well on Tuesday nights on Access TV. They were doing decent numbers. Not amazing numbers, but decent numbers. Being on Thursday, especially around this time of the year, means every single Thursday you're in direct competition with the NFL. Now, obviously, if they'd have stayed on Tuesday, they would have been in direct competition with NXT. And when they were in direct competition with NXT twice in 2020, they got absolutely destroyed. So it's kind of which one is the lesser of two evils. Do you want to go head-to-head with another pro wrestling program, or do you want to go head-to-head with the NFL, and hopefully pro wrestling fans that aren't NFL fans will tune in? They're kind of screwed either way, and with fans returning as well, it's the perfect storm for the numbers going down. Again, I find it almost interesting. Actually, that whilst a lot of promotions such as Ring of Honor struggled obviously through the pandemic, and MLW shut down during the pandemic, they're open now and they're actually doing great stuff, drawing 5,000 people to some of their shows. Impact Wrestling actually thrived in the pandemic with having no fans there. Pretty much every other pro wrestling program that didn't have fans in attendance suffered because of it. Impact Wrestling did some of their best business during the pandemic. We're talking about record pay-per-views. In terms of Rebellion, was the highest grossing and most successful pay-per-view that Anthem has done as the owners of Impact Wrestling. We're talking about record ratings. The highest ever rating they've done on Access TV was when Kenny Omega made his debut at the end of 2020. So Impact Wrestling was doing record business in 2020 due to the pandemic, due to fans not being in attendance and not knowing what was going to happen. There was this air of suspense every single week, and we don't see that anymore. Factored in the move to Thursdays, and as I mentioned, it's been the perfect storm. But I don't see it really changing. We mentioned before, some solutions. Going live, of course, is a solution to it. I don't think completely solves the problem because you're still in competition with the NFL, but I think it would help the spoiler stuff. Maybe it's a case of going just to Tuesday. Screw it. Go to Tuesday. Go to Tuesday and be live. Or maybe go to the weekend, right? I know it's going to be difficult, and I know usually you have Impact Plus events on a Saturday or whatever, but there's pro wrestling on every night of the week at this point. And maybe, I understand there isn't it on Thursdays, and that's why they went with Thursdays in the end, but the NFL's on Thursdays. Maybe it is worth going on a Saturday. Maybe it is worth going on a Saturday, and then when you've got an Impact Plus event, that just replaces the episode of Impact on Access TV. I don't know. Considering, Anthem owns Impact and it owns Access TV, they have the opportunity to move things around, and maybe they should look into doing that, but we'll have to wait and see. A couple of notes as well when it comes to the NWA that pertains to Impact Wrestling, so we'll speak about it. Of course, the Knockouts Championship was defended last night, or this past weekend rather, at NWA Hard Times 2 on pay-per-view. Now, the match was a curious one, wasn't it? Because it saw Mickie James, who I don't think is technically contracted to Impact Wrestling, but she's the Impact Knockouts Champion, defending the Knockouts Championship, the Impact Knockouts Championship, against an AEW contracted talent in KIERA HOGAN at an NWA pay-per-view, and was certainly interesting. But Mickie James retained the championship, as most people would expect. It was a decent match. I did think they could have done maybe something a little bit curious if they'd have switched the belts. You've got an AEW star holding an Impact Championship. She used to be a former Impact star, all that kind of stuff. There could have been maybe something to do with that, but they didn't, and I didn't expect them to. As I mentioned, they've got their match booked between Mickie James and Deonna Purrazzo at Hard to Kill in January, and frankly, I think that Deonna Purrazzo wins that match. I was surprised, to be honest with you, to see Mickie James win the match at Bound for Glory. That did take me by surprise, so I think that Deonna Purrazzo gets the belt back, and I think this is just a kind of a run of Impact of Mickie James in Impact Wrestling, and she deserves it. She absolutely deserves it. But it kind of sets up nicely, doesn't it, that Deonna Purrazzo match at Hard to Kill in January. Speaking of Matt Cardona, we spoke about him earlier when it comes to the main event of Hard to Kill, but speaking of the NWA, we saw him as well at Hard Times 2. Yes, Matt Cardona is showing up everywhere now. He's not just in Impact Wrestling or GCW. He's going to be at that Hammerstein Ballroom show, but also he appeared at NWA Hard Times 2 this past weekend. Matt Cardona has arrived in the National Wrestling Alliance. Again, now, Matt Cardona is not signed to a contract in Impact Wrestling, but it further goes to show this open relationship that's going on right now between Impact Wrestling and the NWA, one that's been absolutely magnificently repaired by Mickie James, it must be said. Now, Trevor Murdoch successfully retained the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship in the main event of Hard Times 2, defeating Mike Knox. After the match, though, surprisingly, Matt Cardona appeared to congratulate Murdoch. With his back turned, Knox hit Murdoch with a low blow. Mick Foley, who was a special guest at the event, wasn't pleased with this and called out DePope to go after Cardona, but DePope was taken out by the former GCW World Champion. Cardona then got in the ring, where Knox continued his attack on Murdoch. Cardona then held up the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, making his intentions known. So Matt Cardona is going after the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. Could we see a situation where Cardona is both the Impact and NWA World Heavyweight Champion? I doubt it. I doubt it. If it was Moose showing up, the Impact World Champion going after Trevor Murdoch, I would say absolutely. That's a very realistic possibility, and it'd be good business. Maybe not for Impact Wrestling, but certainly for the NWA. I could see Cardona winning it, absolutely, because I do think Murdoch's going to be a transitional champion. And there's no doubt in my mind, Billy Corgan looks at Matt Cardona and goes, absolutely, I'd want that guy to be the NWA World Heavyweight Champion. So I could see that happening. It looks to be like maybe he's going to be a heel in the NWA, which once again kind of baffles me as to why he's not a heel in Impact. Maybe that's coming, but I want to see the GCW version. I want to see this version of Matt Cardona in Impact. Maybe it's going to be completely different. Maybe Matt Cardona is going to have a different persona for each promotion that he appears in. Maybe that's the genius of it all. He's a different version of Matt Cardona in Impact. He's a different version of Matt Cardona in GCW, and he's a different version of Matt Cardona in the NWA. And maybe that will be fun as well. So we'll have to wait and see. But I was surprised to see him show up at the weekend. I really was. But look, guys, as always, it's just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on all of these stories we've spoken about today? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about Impact Wrestling, AEW, WWE, New Japan Pro Wrestling, the NWA, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community below. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Go to the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You could do that by clicking the bottom right-hand corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or having come across this video today. And I'll speak to you again very, very soon.